The quiet hum of the air conditioner in my Atlanta apartment is the loudest sound I hear most nights. It's a sterile, predictable sound, a stark contrast to the cicadas that used to scream from the humid Georgia nights back home, or the silence that fell after the screaming stopped 6 years ago. I look out the window at the city lights, a million tiny sparks in the dark, each one a life I don't know, a story separate from mine. That separation is something I've built, brick by careful brick, around myself. It's a fortress of peace, fragile but necessary. My name is Ethan Hayes. I am in my early 30s now, living a life that is entirely my own, carved out of the wreckage of a past I tried to bury under miles of asphalt and years of silence. The past, though, has a way of finding you, even across state lines and through the carefully constructed walls you build. It arrived 3 weeks ago in the form of a phone call, a name on the screen I hadn't seen in half a decade. Eleanor Vance, my grandmother, the matriarch, the architect of the silence that followed the storm. Before the silence there was the noise, 10 years of it, the sound of a life being built. Clara and I met at a high school football game, two awkward teenagers bundled against the crisp Georgia autumn air. We talked for hours that night, the stadium lights casting long shadows on the field, the distant roar of the crowd a backdrop to the quiet discovery of a connection that felt, even then, profound. Clara Hayes. Her name felt right intertwined with mine. We were inseparable after that. High school sweethearts turned college sweethearts, navigating the tricky waters of long distance with weekly 3-hour drives, care packages during exams, and phone calls that stretched late into the night. We talked about everything, our dreams, our fears, the simple, ordinary future we planned together, a house with a porch swing, maybe a dog, kids who would run through the sprinklers on hot summer days. It was a simple dream, but it was ours, and I poured every ounce of my being into making it real. After college, we moved back to our small town in rural Georgia. Not much changed there. The Hayes family had been rooted in this soil for generations, our lives intertwined with the rhythms of the land and the expectations of the community. Grandma Eleanor Vance sat at the center of it all, a formidable woman with a will of iron and a deep-seated belief in the importance of family legacy and reputation. She wasn't overtly cruel, but her love was a conditional thing, dispensed based on how well you adhered to her vision of how a Hayes should be. My cousin, Caleb Hayes, was her golden boy. Charming, handsome, with an easy smile and a knack for getting out of trouble, Caleb was everything Eleanor seemed to value. He slid through life on charisma and Eleanor's indulgence, while I was the steady, reliable one, the one who worked hard and followed the rules. I didn't resent Caleb, not then. He was family. We grew up together, cousins who were more like brothers in the way only small-town, close-knit families can be. Clara and I married when we were 24. It was a beautiful southern wedding at the old church downtown, followed by a reception at the Hayes estate, a grand old house on the edge of town that had seen better days but still held the weight of generations. Eleanor presided over the guest list, the seating chart, and every detail with meticulous control. Clara looked radiant, her eyes shining with the same hope I felt. We were starting our life, our real life, in the place we called home, surrounded by family. It felt perfect for a while it was. We settled into married life, bought a small house just outside of town, started thinking about the porch swing and the dog. I was working at the local bank, saving for our future. Clara was teaching at the elementary school. Life was good. It was quiet, predictable, everything I had wanted. The cracks appeared subtly at first. Caleb always needing something, always charming his way into or out of situations. He'd come by ostensibly to visit, but his eyes lingered on Clara a moment too long. His jokes had a double edge I didn't fully grasp. Clara seemed distracted sometimes, distant. I attributed it to the stresses of her job, the adjustments of married life. I was a fool, a complete and utter fool. The world didn't end with a bang, it ended with a whisper in a doctor's office. Clara was pregnant. The news should have been joyous, the next step in our carefully planned future. But the look on Clara's face wasn't joy. It was terror. She confessed later that day, the words tumbling out in a torrent of tears and choked sobs. It had been going on for months. Caleb, my cousin, my brother figure, and she was pregnant. She was sure it was his. The timing, she said, the cold, hard arithmetic of it. The pain was a physical blow, stealing the air from my lungs. Betrayal, not just of vows, but of trust, of family, of the future I had built with my heart and soul. Why? How? The questions screamed in my head, but the answers were hollow. Clara was lost in her own fear and guilt. Caleb, I didn't even confront him then. The thought of his face, his easy smile, twisted my stomach. I went to Eleanor. I needed my family, my grandmother. I needed the matriarch to wrap her arms around me, to be outraged on my behalf, to protect me from the devastation. I found her in the sitting room at the estate, sipping iced tea, the afternoon sun filtering through the tall windows. I told her everything, my voice shaking, the words raw with pain. I expected shock, outrage, condemnation of Caleb and Clara. What I got was a chilling, detached practicality. She didn't even flinch. Her eyes, sharp and cold, assessed me, then looked past me, already calculating. A scandal, she murmured, more to herself than to me. A pregnant bride, it must be handled discreetly. She spoke of reputation, of the family name, of the need to avoid gossip in the town. She spoke of Caleb, his youthful indiscretion, the necessity of him doing the right thing by marrying Clara quickly. She spoke of Clara, now carrying a Hayes child, needing to be brought into the fold properly. She didn't speak of me. Not my pain, not my decade with Clara, not the life that had just been obliterated. When I finally managed to ask, my voice barely a whisper, what about me? What was I supposed to do? She looked at me with something akin to impatience. Ethan, she said, her voice firm, the tone that allowed no argument. Family is paramount. Caleb must marry her. It's his duty. And yours is to be a good Hayes. Accept it. Be accommodating. It's what's best for everyone, for the family. Be accommodating. Bury the betrayal. Smile and pretend my wife wasn't carrying my cousin's child, that my family hadn't just prioritized reputation and a favored son over my broken heart. It wasn't just Clara and Caleb who had betrayed me. It was Eleanor, the heart of the family, the one who was supposed to hold us together, who instead had just ripped me out of the picture entirely. I couldn't breathe in that house. I couldn't breathe in that town. The air felt thick with deceit and indifference. I left that day. I packed a single suitcase, got in my car and drove. I didn't know where I was going, only that I had to get away. Away from Clara, away from Caleb, away from Eleanor, and the suffocating weight of a family that valued appearance over its own members. I drove until Georgia was a distant memory in the rearview mirror. I landed in Atlanta, a city big enough to get lost in, to disappear. I cut off contact, changed my number, ignored the few emails that found their way to me, mostly from distant relatives who didn't understand the depth of the fracture. Eleanor never called. Not once, not until 3 weeks ago. 6 years. 6 years I spent rebuilding. It wasn't easy. The betrayal had left deep scars. Trust was a foreign concept. Every smile felt like a potential lie, every kind word a hidden agenda. I threw myself into work, found a small, anonymous apartment in a quiet part of the city. I started seeing a therapist, a kind, patient woman who helped me untangle the knots of anger, grief, and confusion. She taught me about boundaries, about self-worth, about the difference between forgiveness and acceptance. I learned that I didn't owe anyone my peace, especially not the people who had shattered it so completely. Slowly, painstakingly, I built a new life. I got a better job, found a small group of friends who knew nothing about my past in Georgia, who accepted me for who I was in the present. Ben Carter was one of them. We met at work. He was straightforward, kind, with a dry wit that always managed to make me laugh. I eventually told him some of my story, enough for him to understand the wall I had built. He never pushed, only offered quiet support and practical advice. He was the kind of friend I needed, someone grounded and real, a stark contrast to the shifting sands of my family dynamics. My life in Atlanta wasn't perfect, but it was mine. It was safe. It was peaceful. I had built it from scratch, piece by agonizing piece, out of the rubble. I had learned to breathe again, to trust again, albeit cautiously. The raw wound had become a scar, still sensitive but no longer bleeding. And then, the call. Eleanor Vance. Her name flashing on my screen was like a jolt of electricity, a shockwave from the past I thought I had outrun. My stomach clenched, a familiar knot of dread and resentment. I almost didn't answer. Part of me wanted to let it ring, to maintain the silence that had become my shield. But another part... A morbid curiosity, a flicker of something I couldn't name, maybe the lingering, foolish hope for an apology, for acknowledgement, made me swipe to answer. "Ethan?" Her voice was older, thinner, but the imperious tone was unmistakable. It wasn't a tentative greeting, a soft inquiry after years of silence. It was a demand, edged with panic. "Ethan, thank God you answered. It's Caleb." My blood ran cold. Caleb, after all these years. What about Caleb? What about him, Grandma? My voice was flat, devoid of emotion I didn't want to show. "He's been in an accident," she said, the panic evident now. "A terrible one, at the old mill. It's bad, Ethan, very bad." She rambled on, describing the accident, the extent of his injuries, severe, spinal cord. The doctors weren't sure if he would ever walk again. He was in the hospital in Savannah. My mind reeled. Caleb, the golden boy, laid low. A part of me, a small dark part I was ashamed of, felt a flicker of grim satisfaction. Consequences. But the larger part was just numb. He was still my cousin, my family, the man who had broken my life, now broken himself. Then came the pivot. The reason for the call. It wasn't just to inform me, it was a summons. "Ethan, we need you," Eleanor said, her voice shifting from distressed matriarch to demanding general. "Things are difficult. Clara is overwhelmed. The business, it's a mess, and Leo, he needs a man around, a father figure." Caleb's son, my first cousin once removed, the child born of the betrayal. I had never met him. "We need you to come home, Ethan," she pressed. "Just for a while. Help Clara, help with the business. Be there for Leo. It's your family duty." Family duty. The words tasted like ash. My family duty? After they had cast me out, dismissed my pain, told me to be accommodating, while they built a life on the ruins of mine? Now, when their carefully constructed world had crumbled, they expected me to swoop in and fix it? Rage, cold and sharp, sliced through the numbness. Family duty? I repeated, my voice rising despite myself. "Where was my family duty 6 years ago, Grandma, when my wife was pregnant with Caleb's child? When you told me to just accept it and be glad for the man who stole my life?" Eleanor's tone hardened instantly. The panic was gone, replaced by her familiar, steely resolve. "Don't be selfish, Ethan. That was the past. This is now. Caleb is hurt. Clara is struggling. A child needs you." "A child needs the father he has, or the family that chose to raise him," I retorted, the words pouring out, years of suppressed anger finally finding a voice. "You all chose. You chose Caleb and Clara over me. You chose reputation over my well-being. You discarded me. And now, because things are hard for you, you expect me to drop everything and come running?" "Family always comes first," she snapped, her voice rising. "You have a responsibility." "My responsibility is to the life I built after you destroyed the first one," I said, my voice firm now, the rage settling into a hard resolve. "I owe you nothing, Grandma. Nothing." I told her clearly and unequivocally that I would not be coming back to play house, to be a stand-in father, or to prop up the family business that had been built on a lie. I told her that if she ever called me again, it had better be to offer a genuine apology for how they had treated me, not to make demands. I hung up before she could respond, my hand trembling. The silence in my apartment felt different now, not peaceful, but charged with the echo of her voice, the resurfacing of old wounds. My heart pounded. Part of me felt a fierce satisfaction. I had stood my ground. I had finally said what needed to be said. But another part felt a familiar ache, a sadness for the family I had lost, even if that loss had been necessary for my survival. Guilt gnawed at me, a small, persistent worm. The child, Leo, he was innocent in all of this. Was I being too harsh, too unforgiving? I talked to Ben about it later that week. I laid it all out, the call, Eleanor's demands, my refusal. Ben listened patiently, then looked at me with steady eyes. "Man," he said, shaking his head, "that's a lot." "Am I wrong?" I asked, the guilt heavy in my chest. Should I help for the kid?" Ben leaned back in his chair. "Look, I'm not going to tell you what to do. That's your call. But you spent 6 years building yourself back up. You built a good life here. You did it because they broke the first one. They didn't just break it, Ethan. They stomped on it and then blamed you for the mess. Now they want you to come clean it up? Because they're in trouble?" He paused. "They made their bed, man. It's not your job to lie in it with them, especially not after what they did." His words were a balm. They didn't erase the guilt entirely, but they reinforced the validity of my feelings, the necessity of my boundaries. My friends, The life I had built, they were my real family now. The ones who saw me, supported me, didn't demand that I sacrifice myself for their convenience. The calls didn't stop after that first one. Eleanor was relentless. Text messages followed, then calls again, sometimes from numbers I didn't recognize, presumably other family members she had enlisted. The messages were a mixture of guilt-tripping and thinly veiled attempts to make me feel essential. Clara is just beside herself, Ethan. The business is failing without Caleb's hand. Your expertise would be invaluable. Leo asks about family he hasn't met. They chipped away at my resolve, stirring up the dust of old pain and fresh frustration. I ignored most of them. A few times I sent back a curt text. My position hasn't changed. The pressure was exhausting, a constant low-grade hum of anxiety beneath the surface of my calm life. It felt like they were trying to drag me back into the swamp I had fought so hard to escape. After nearly 3 weeks of this relentless contact, something shifted. It wasn't guilt, not entirely. It was a weary curiosity. I wanted to see Caleb, not out of brotherly concern, but to see the consequences of his choices laid bare. I wanted to see Eleanor and Clara, to face them on my terms, in their space, and deliver my final refusal face to face. I needed closure, a definitive end to the pressure campaign. I told Ben I was going down to Savannah. Just to see the situation, I said, not to agree to anything. Ben looked worried, but he understood. "Be careful, man," he said. "Don't let them pull you back in." The drive down to Savannah was long and heavy. As I crossed the state line back into Georgia, the air seemed to thicken, the humidity clinging to everything. The landscape became familiar. The tall pines, the sprawling live oaks dripping with Spanish moss, the signs for small towns I hadn't thought of in years. Memories, unwanted guests, crowded my mind. Driving Clara to the coast for a weekend getaway, driving past Caleb's college on the way to visit him. Driving away from it all 6 years ago with nothing but a suitcase and a broken heart. Savannah was beautiful, but it felt wrong, too close, too southern. Too much like home, the home that had rejected me. The hospital was large, modern, a sterile box that felt out of place amidst the historic squares and cobblestone streets. My stomach was a tight knot of anxiety as I walked through the doors. I hadn't seen any of them in 6 years. How would they look? How would I feel? I found Caleb's room. Eleanor and Clara were already there. Eleanor looked older, her hair greyer, more lines etched around her eyes, but she still held herself with that rigid, unyielding posture. Clara looked tired, deeply tired. Her face was thinner, her eyes shadowed with worry. She wore a simple dress, her hair pulled back carelessly. The vibrant woman I had loved was gone, replaced by someone burdened and weary. Seeing Caleb in the hospital bed was shocking. He was pale, gaunt, hooked up to tubes and machines. The easy charm was gone, replaced by a blankness in his eyes. He looked small, diminished. This was the man who had destroyed my life. And here he was, broken. A complex mix of pity, anger, and something akin to detached observation washed over me. He was a consequence, the living embodiment of the choices they had made. Eleanor saw me first. Her eyes widened, a flicker of surprise, then triumph. "Ethan!" she exclaimed, rushing towards me. She reached out as if to hug me, but I instinctively stepped back. I wasn't ready for that. Maybe I would never be. "Grandma," I said, my voice neutral. I nodded briefly at Clara, who offered a small, hesitant smile that didn't reach her eyes. I didn't return it. The sight of her brought back a fresh wave of pain, the memory of her confession, the finality of her choice. "You came," Eleanor said, recovering quickly. "I knew you would. Family comes first." "I came to see Caleb's condition," I corrected, my eyes on the man in the bed, "and to speak with you. Not to sign up for anything." Eleanor's smile tightened, but she didn't argue, not yet. She launched into a detailed explanation of Caleb's injuries, the long road to recovery, the grim prognosis. Spinal cord injury, paralyzed from the waist down. He would need constant care, physical therapy, major adjustments to his life. It was devastating, objectively. As she spoke, a small boy, around 5 or 6, wandered into the room, clutching a worn stuffed animal. He had Caleb's light brown hair and Clara's eyes, but there was a wariness about him, a quietness that felt too old for his years. Leo, my nephew, the boy I had never met, the innocent consequence of the storm that had ripped my life apart. Clara knelt beside him. "Leo, this is your Uncle Ethan." "Uncle Ethan." The words felt foreign, awkward. I knelt too, trying to soften my posture, to appear less imposing. "Hey, Leo," I said, forcing a smile. "That's a cool dinosaur." He looked at me with wide, curious eyes, then back at his mother. He didn't say anything, just clutched his toy tighter. I asked him about school, about his favourite games. He answered in hesitant monosyllables. My heart ached for him. He was caught in the middle of a mess he didn't create, now facing a future with a disabled father and a family fractured by secrets and resentment. He was the only truly innocent party in the room. Eleanor watched our interaction with shrewd eyes already, I suspected, calculating how she could use his presence as leverage. After a few awkward minutes, I stood up. "Grandma," I said, turning to Eleanor, "I need to talk to you, away from here." She seemed pleased. "Of course, dear. Come back to the estate. We'll talk properly." The drive back to the Hayes estate felt like travelling through time. The familiar roads, the old oak trees, the scent of the humid air, it was all the same, yet I was a different person. The house loomed at the end of the long, tree-lined driveway, grand and imposing, a monument to a family history I no longer felt a part of. It looked just as I remembered, maybe a little more faded, a little more burdened by the years. Eleanor led me into the formal sitting room, the same room where I had told her about the betrayal 6 years ago. It felt like a stage set for a repeat performance, but this time I wouldn't be playing the victim. She sat in her usual armchair, a queen on her slightly worn throne. I chose a chair opposite her, sitting straighter, consciously projecting a sense of calm strength I didn't entirely feel. She didn't waste time. After a brief perfunctory inquiry about my life in Atlanta, which felt utterly fake, she launched into it. The sermon. About family. About duty. About how hard things were for Clara, trying to manage everything. Caleb's care, Leo, the household, the mounting debts from the struggling family business that Caleb had been running, or mismanaging, I suspected. "It's too much for her. Ethan," Eleanor said, her voice dripping with expectation. "She needs help. The family needs help. You're the only one who can do it. You're healthy. You're capable. You have a good head for business. Always did. Caleb, he's out of commission. For a long time, maybe forever." She painted a picture of a family in crisis, looking to its strongest member, me, to step into the breach. She spoke of Leo needing a male influence, needing stability. She spoke of the family legacy, the business that needed saving. It was a relentless barrage of guilt, obligation, and thinly veiled demands. I listened, letting her finish. The knot in my stomach tightened, but my resolve held firm. This was it, the moment of truth. When she finally paused, her eyes fixed on me, waiting for my capitulation, I spoke. "Grandma," I began, my voice steady, cutting through the heavy air of the room. "I heard you. I heard how difficult things are. And I saw Caleb. I truly do feel pity for his situation." It was true. Seeing him so broken had stirred something, a recognition of shared mortality, even if the path that led him there was paved with my pain. And I feel for Leo. He's an innocent child caught in the middle. Eleanor leaned forward, a flicker of hope in her eyes. "Then you understand. You'll help." "No, Grandma," I said, meeting her gaze directly. "I understand the situation, but understanding it doesn't mean I'm going to sacrifice the life I built to fix it." Her face hardened instantly. "Sacrifice? What sacrifice? It's your family, your blood." "My blood that you dismissed 6 years ago," I countered, my voice gaining strength. "My family that told me to bury my pain and be accommodating while my wife was pregnant with my cousin's child. Do you remember that day, Grandma? In this very room? Do you remember telling me to just accept it? To be a good Hayes by disappearing?" Eleanor waved a dismissive hand. "That was different. That was a regrettable incident. This is a crisis. Caleb is incapacitated. The family is in jeopardy. A crisis that is a direct consequence of the regrettable incident," I stated, the words precise, undeniable. You chose to protect Caleb and the family name over me. You chose to bring Clara and Caleb's child into the heart of the family while pushing me out. You made your choice, Grandma, 6 years ago, and I made mine. I chose to leave, to build a life where I was valued, where I was safe, where I wasn't constantly reminded of betrayal. "Safe?" she scoffed. "Safe and alone? Away from the people who love you? The people who love me don't demand I erase myself for their convenience," I said, the pain sharp but controlled. The people who love me don't tell me my pain is an inconvenience. You didn't love me 6 years ago, Grandma. Not enough to stand by me. Not enough to acknowledge the depth of the wrong done to me. You prioritized appearances. You prioritized Caleb. And now, when your priorities have led to hardship, you expect me to step in? It's for Leo, she cried, her voice rising, hitting the emotional blackmail hard. He needs a father figure. He needs stability. He needs the family. He has to step up, I said firmly. Clara is his mother. You are his grandmother. You are the ones who chose to raise him in this situation, and you have the resources, the family network here, to figure this out. It is not my responsibility to step in and pretend to be his father, to play the role of the man who stole my life simply because his actual father is unable to. You are being selfish, Ethan, she accused, her face flushed with anger, turning your back on your family in their time of need. You turned your back on me in my time of need, I retorted, the words ringing with finality. For 6 years I have heard almost nothing from you. No calls asking how I was. No interest in the life I was building. Only silence. And now, the first time you reach out in years, it's because you need something. Because Caleb is broken, and you expect me to fill the void. That is not family, Grandma. That is exploitation. I stood up then, the movement deliberate. Eleanor watched me, her eyes narrowed, her face a mask of fury and disbelief that I was defying her. I will not be helping in the way you demand, I stated, my voice clear and unwavering. I will not move back. I will not take over the business. I will not be a father figure to Leo. My life is in Atlanta. I built it. It is where I am whole. I saw the calculation flicker in her eyes again. Was there any room for negotiation? Any way to salvage something? However, I continued, leaving a sliver of possibility, but on my terms. I am open to limited contact in the future, but only if you are willing to acknowledge the pain you caused me. Only if you are willing to show genuine interest in the life I have built, not just what I can do for you. Only if you can respect my boundaries. And under no circumstances will that contact involve me stepping into Caleb's role or acting as Leo's father. So you're just abandoning us? She spat, the veneer of civility completely gone. I'm choosing myself, I replied simply. Something you taught me how to do, indirectly. You showed me that family obligation is a one-way street for some people. You showed me that sometimes the only person you can truly rely on to protect you is yourself. I turned and walked out of the sitting room, leaving Eleanor sitting alone in the heavy silence of the old house. I didn't look back. As I walked down the long driveway, the setting sun cast long shadows. The air felt thick and humid, the cicadas beginning their evening chorus. It was the sound of home, of the past, a sound that used to comfort me, but now just felt loud, oppressive. Getting back in my car, I felt a mix of emotions swirling inside me. There was the lingering ache, the sadness for the irreparable damage done to my family, for the innocent child caught in the crossfire. There was a flicker of guilt for walking away from their hardship, even if it was hardship of their own making. But stronger than the guilt, stronger than the sadness, was a profound sense of relief. I had done it. I had faced them. I had articulated my pain and my boundaries. I had refused to be pulled back into the toxic dynamic. I had chosen my own peace. The drive back to Atlanta was long, giving me time to process. I thought about Caleb, injured and dependent. I thought about Clara, weary and burdened. I thought about Leo, quiet and watchful. I felt a pang for the life they were living, the consequences they were facing. But I also thought about the 10 years I had poured into a relationship that was shattered by deceit. The 6 years I had spent painstakingly rebuilding myself from the ground up. That life, my peace, my well-being, they were precious. They were hard-won. I wouldn't sacrifice them. I called Ben when I got back to Atlanta. I told him about the visit, the confrontation, Eleanor's reaction. He listened, then said, "Good for you, man. Seriously. That took guts. You did the right thing, for you." His validation meant more than any words Eleanor could have offered. In the weeks that followed, the contact from my family didn't disappear entirely, but it changed. The frantic demands stopped, the guilt trips lessened, replaced by tentative, almost awkward phone calls. Sometimes it was Eleanor asking surface-level questions about my job, my apartment, the weather in Atlanta. Sometimes it was a cousin I hadn't spoken to in years reaching out cautiously. The conversations were strained, often short, filled with long pauses. They weren't apologies, not yet, but they felt different. Like they were testing the waters, perhaps beginning to understand that the old dynamics no longer applied. That I was no longer the accommodating, easily dismissed Ethan they had left behind. I responded cautiously, kept the conversations brief, answered questions about my life without delving into deep emotional territory. I didn't ask about Caleb or Clara or Leo unless they brought it up, and even then I kept my reactions measured. I was holding firm to my boundaries, but leaving the door slightly ajar, a hairline crack for a potential different kind of relationship to form, one based on mutual respect and genuine interest, not obligation and manipulation. It was a slow, uncertain process. I started seeing my therapist again. The visit had stirred up old feelings, old trauma. It was necessary to process it, to ensure the scar didn't become an open wound again. We talked about the confrontation, the guilt, the relief, the complex feelings about Leo. She helped me reaffirm that choosing myself was not selfish, but necessary. That I could have empathy for their situation without sacrificing my own hard-won peace. My focus remained on my life in Atlanta, my job, my friends, the quiet routines that grounded me. The fortress of peace I had built felt stronger now, tested and reinforced. I wasn't sure what the future held for my family. Would Eleanor ever truly understand? Would any of them genuinely apologize? Would I ever have a relationship with Leo, the child who shared my bloodline but was born into a life I had to escape? I didn't know, and for the first time in a long time, I felt okay with not knowing. I had faced the past, articulated my truth, and held my ground. I had shown myself that I was strong enough to protect my peace, even from the people who were supposed to be my foundation. The wound had been reopened, but I had stitched it back up myself, with the strong thread of self-respect and clear boundaries. I was ready to move forward, not forgetting the past, but no longer defined by it. The quiet hum of the air conditioner in my apartment was still just a sound, but now it felt like the sound of my own life, steady and clear, finally, truly, my own. The contact from my family has continued, mostly from Eleanor, but occasionally from a few other cousins who seem to have taken her cue. The calls are strange. They feel transactional, even when they aren't explicitly asking for anything. Eleanor will talk about the weather, ask about my job, mention some distant relative's illness. It's like she's trying to build a bridge, but she refuses to acknowledge the chasm she created. She hasn't apologized. Not for dismissing my pain, not for prioritizing Caleb, not for trying to guilt me into fixing her problems. There's a stubborn pride there, a refusal to admit she was wrong, and without that acknowledgement, the bridge remains unfinished, unstable. I respond politely but distantly. I keep the conversations short. I don't offer details about my life beyond the superficial. I ask about Caleb's physical therapy, about Clara, about Leo, but I keep my tone neutral. I'm curious, yes, but from a safe distance. I'm not ready to invest emotionally, not when the foundation is still missing. Ben sees the toll it takes on me, even these strained interactions. "You don't have to answer, he said one evening over beers. "I know," I replied. "But I don't know. Part of me feels like maybe this is what it looks like now. Maybe this is the only kind of relationship I can have with them. It's not the one I wanted, not the one I lost, but maybe it's something." "Or maybe it's just less aggressive manipulation," Ben said dryly. "Make sure you know the difference." He was right, of course. It's easy to get pulled back in, to mistake a lull in the storm for clear skies. I remind myself constantly of my boundaries. No financial help. No stepping into Caleb's role. No sacrificing my peace. Any contact must be respectful and acknowledge the past, even implicitly. I think about Leo often. His quiet eyes in the hospital room. He's the only one who truly didn't deserve any of this. The thought of him growing up with a father who is severely injured, within a family dynamic that is so deeply fractured, weighs on me. But I also know that stepping in, pretending to be a father figure, would be a lie. It would confuse him, muddy the waters even further, and ultimately it would break me again. My decision not to step into that role wasn't a rejection of him, but a protection of myself, and perhaps in a complicated way, a refusal to perpetuate the cycle of deceit and false appearances that has plagued my family. I wonder if Caleb ever thinks about what he did. lying there in the hospital bed, facing a completely different future than the one he had planned. Does he feel remorse? Does he understand the magnitude of the destruction he caused, not just to me, but to his own life, to Clara's, to Leo's? I don't know. I didn't talk to him during the visit, beyond that initial awkward moment. I wasn't ready. I'm still not sure I ever will be. Clara, seeing her was difficult. All those years, all those memories, compressed into a single weary glance. She didn't plead with me, didn't make demands. She just looked tired. I don't know what her life is like now, the reality of caring for Caleb, managing the household, dealing with Eleanor's expectations, raising Leo. It must be incredibly hard. Part of me feels a flicker of sympathy, a residue of the love I once had for her, but the betrayal runs too deep. The fact that she chose him, that she was willing to build her future on the wreckage of ours, is a wound that hasn't fully healed. The family business, the old mill, is struggling, I hear mentioned in veiled terms by Eleanor. It was always Caleb's domain, the thing Eleanor expected him to inherit and run. My refusal to step in likely put it in serious jeopardy. Another consequence. It doesn't bring me joy, this hardship they face. It just is. The inevitable outcome of choices made, of realities ignored. I've been focusing on my own work. It's a good distraction, something I can control. I'm good at it. It's stable. It's mine. I've also been spending more time with Ben and my other friends. They are the family I chose, the ones who provide support and understanding without judgment or expectation. They remind me of the value of healthy relationships, of reciprocal care and respect. Eleanor's calls continue, sporadic but persistent. Sometimes I let them go to voicemail. Sometimes I answer, steeling myself for the awkward conversation. There was one call last week where she mentioned Leo drawing a picture of a family tree for school. She didn't say my name, but she mentioned all the cousins. It was a small thing, but it felt like a deliberate inclusion, a subtle acknowledgement of my existence within the larger family structure, even if only on paper. It wasn't an apology, but it was something. A tiny shift. I'm trying to approach these interactions with cautious optimism, but also with unwavering vigilance. My boundaries are non-negotiable. I will not be guilt-tripped. I will not be manipulated. I will not sacrifice my peace for their comfort. If a relationship with my family is possible in the future, it will have to be a fundamentally different one than the one I grew up in, one built on honesty, respect, and a genuine acknowledgement of the past, not just a convenient forgetting of it. I don't know if that's possible. Eleanor is a proud woman, set in her ways. Admitting fault is not something she does easily. But perhaps, facing the reality of Caleb's condition and the challenges ahead, she is beginning to understand the cost of her choices. Or perhaps she's just changing tactics, hoping that a softer approach will eventually wear me down. I have to be prepared for both. The scar is still there, a reminder of the past. But it's just a scar now, not an open wound. It aches sometimes, especially when the calls come, pulling me back to that small town, that old house, that painful history. But mostly I live in the present, in the life I built, the life I chose. It's a quiet life, a peaceful life. It's mine, and I will protect it. I look out the window again at the city lights. They no longer feel like a million separate lives I don't know. They feel like possibilities, like a future stretching out before me, unburdened by the weight of the past, or at least managed and contained. I'm not sure what the next chapter holds. Maybe more awkward phone calls, maybe a slow, tentative rebuilding of some kind of connection, maybe just continued distance. But whatever it is, I know I can face it. I faced the worst and survived. I rebuilt. I set my boundaries. I chose myself, and that, I finally understand, was the most important choice of all. The rhythm of my life in Atlanta has reasserted itself, steady and predictable. The calls from Georgia still come, though less frequently now. Eleanor's attempts at conversation remain superficial, dwelling on the weather, local happenings, the slow, arduous process of Caleb's physical therapy. She still avoids any mention of the past betrayal, any hint of apology. It's a deliberate omission, a silent agreement to pretend the 6 years of silence, the painful reason for it, never happened. I continue to respond with polite brevity. I haven't gone back to Georgia. The thought still brings a knot to my stomach, a reluctance to step back into that atmosphere of heavy history and unspoken resentments. My therapist encourages me to explore this reluctance, to understand what I'm protecting. It's the peace, I tell her. The hard-won peace. And the knowledge that stepping back in fully means potentially exposing myself to the same dynamics that broke me before. I ask about Leo sometimes, cautiously. Eleanor's descriptions are brief. He's doing well in school. He's adjusting to Caleb being home now that he's been discharged from the hospital. The family home has been modified to accommodate Caleb's wheelchair. It's a practical detail that speaks volumes about the permanent changes the accident has wrought. I try to imagine Leo's life, seeing his father confined to a chair, the shift in the household dynamics. It's a difficult image. Ben remains my anchor here. He doesn't pry, but he's always there to listen, to offer a different perspective. We talk about work, about current events, about the mundane details of our lives. It's grounding. It's real. It's the kind of healthy connection that makes the dysfunction of my family stand out in sharper relief. One evening, Eleanor called and mentioned, almost in passing, that Caleb was struggling emotionally, depressed, frustrated by his limitations. It wasn't a plea for me to come help, not in the usual demanding way. It was more like a simple statement of fact, a vulnerability she rarely showed. It caught me off guard. For a moment the anger and resentment softened, replaced by a flicker of something else, a recognition of his suffering. He wasn't just the golden boy who had betrayed me. He was a man facing a devastating reality. I didn't know how to respond. I mumbled something non-committal about it being a difficult adjustment. The conversation ended shortly after. But the image of Caleb, broken not just physically but emotionally, stayed with me. It didn't erase the past, didn't make the betrayal okay, but it added another layer of complexity to the situation. I discussed it in therapy. The guilt for Leo, the flicker of sympathy for Caleb, the lingering resentment towards Eleanor and Clara. It's a tangled mess of emotions. My therapist helps me separate the threads. It's okay to feel sympathy for Caleb's current plight, she says, without excusing his past actions or feeling obligated to fix his present. It's okay to feel for Leo without stepping into a role that isn't mine. And it's okay to protect myself from a family system that has historically caused me harm. The paternity test, the detail my father mentioned 6 years ago confirming Caleb's fatherhood. It comes back to me sometimes. It was the final, cold confirmation of the betrayal. I never asked Eleanor about it, never asked why they didn't tell me sooner, or why they felt the need to confirm it at all, unless there was a flicker of doubt, a possibility that maybe, but no. Rebecca was sure, the original narrator said. Clara was sure. It doesn't matter now. The child is Leo. He knows Caleb as his father. That truth, regardless of any past tests, is his reality, and mine is the life I built away from it. I've started dating again, cautiously. It's still hard to fully trust, to let someone in. The betrayal left deep scars on my capacity for intimacy, but I'm trying, taking it slow, being open about my past trauma, about the walls I've had to build. The right person will understand, will be patient. Ben is encouraging. He's seen how far I've come. The Hayes estate. I see photos sometimes, posted by distant cousins on social media, which I view from a safe, anonymous account. The house looks the same, maybe a little more worn. It holds so many memories, good and bad. The scavenger hunt for Clara's birthday ending in the park, the picnic I laid out, driving her to the local restaurant for our first date, knocking over the water glass, proposing on the beach under the stars. All those moments, so full of love and hope, now tainted by what came after. The memory of Eleanor's cold eyes in the sitting room, telling me to be accommodating. The image of Caleb in the hospital bed. The quiet presence of Leo. It's a strange tapestry, my past, woven with threads of deep love, devastating betrayal and painful loss, but also with threads of resilience, self-discovery and hard-won peace. Eleanor called again last week. She talked about the town fair, about the heat, about how expensive Caleb's medical equipment was. Still no apology, still no real acknowledgement. I listened, offered brief responses, and ended the call politely. It was the same dance, just a slightly slower tempo. I don't know if the relationship with my family will ever truly heal. Maybe this is the new normal. Distant, strained, built on a foundation of unspoken hurt and cautious, conditional contact. Maybe that's the best I can hope for, and maybe after everything, that's enough. Enough to know they haven't entirely forgotten me, Enough to have a sliver of connection, but not so much that it jeopardizes the life I fought so hard to create. I'm no longer debating my choice. The guilt for Leo is still there, a quiet ache, but it doesn't consume me. I know I made the right decision for myself. I protected my peace, I honored my own pain, I refused to be a pawn in their drama. That was an act of self-preservation, yes, but also an act of strength. I'm ready to move forward. The past is a part of me, but it doesn't define my future. I have a life here, in Atlanta, a life I built with my own two hands, a life filled with genuine connections and quiet contentment. The road ahead is uncertain, as all roads are, but I'm walking it on my own terms, carrying the lessons learned